Hello and welcome to QTV, and boy have we got a fascinating lineup in our programme for you today.
We'll be chatting with longtime activist Mannie and his fascinating journey from South Africa to Sydney to Melbourne.
Sharon Hollis from the Uniting Church will be talking to us about equal love and now everyone's right to get married in their church.
And we'll get all the action from the Midsumma Carnival, the stalls, the shows, the costumes, and people out having fun.
Sounds great. And finally, we're going to delve into the past to look at the life of Bill Hathaway, an inspiring activist who was involved in the action group ACT UP.
My name is Mannie. I've just turned 90. I am a South African, but I've been living in Sydney and Melbourne for the last nearly 40 years.
When did you first realise that you were gay?
That's a difficult one to answer. I probably realised, well, I wouldn't have known about gay or anything like that in those days, but I do know that in my school days, particularly high school, sort of after adolescence, I knew that there were some boys that I was very attracted to, but I wouldn't have known beyond that what really the significance of that was.
What was the attitude in your family towards homosexuality?
Well, I don't think it was ever spoken about. I don't know if anybody, any of them knew anything about it. When I finished at university, I went to work in England for 2 years just after the war, and I came back to South Africa and went to live at home. And at that stage, when I got a job and I was earning my own money, and I very much wanted to go and live on my own in my own flat, my mother wouldn't hear of it.
Did you come from an Orthodox Jewish family?
Well, it was Orthodox to the extent that my grandparents were Orthodox, but by the time of my mother and my stepfather, it wasn't quite so Orthodox anymore. They practiced the Jewish holidays and so on. They kept a kosher home, but it wasn't Orthodox and strict Orthodox in the normal sense.
What was the attitude in the surrounding society towards homosexuality?
There was no information. I didn't really know anything about it. Of course, one sneaked away to look in the dictionary because one knew the word homosexuality. But everybody thought I was just a sissy anyway, which I probably was. And my mother thought she'd make a man of me, so she made me have boxing lessons, and I had to go and do physical training and all sorts of things like that. But of course it never made any difference in the end. When I finished school and went to university, which was 1944, I don't know, I think I started understanding a little bit more, but really knew very, very little. I mean, again, there were lots of students to whom I was attracted physically, but I would never have done anything. I wouldn't have known anything about what to do. And you were supposed to have girlfriends, you know, but it wasn't with girls that I sort of had any feeling whatever.
May I ask when you had your first sexual experience?
One I can't talk about, but after that I was already married and I think I had children by then. And occasionally when I had an opportunity to be out of the house on my own, I went like to shopping centres or whatever to see if I could pick up or be picked up by a man. I was always frightened. So, I mean, those were episodes where anything could have happened, and the police in South Africa were not exactly renowned for their gentle behaviour. And my sympathies were with the oppressed people And I was petrified there of getting involved, because if you went to jail in South Africa as a political activist, there would really be problems. When you went to a beat or something like that, which I did here and there, I was petrified that the cops would come. It was mostly mechanical sex, but here and there I was quite ready to share affection, but how was I going to do it under the circumstances? It was just very difficult. I was frightened of the people around me, but not at work. I mean, at work it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to be outed at work. And then that only started occurring after 1985, when my wife and I separated.
Why did you decide to come to Australia?
I had a son who was at university, and he was getting to be of military age, and if he failed at university he would have had to go into the South African Army, and there was no way that I was going to allow that to happen. And I actually had Australian citizenship. It's a whole long story, but I had Australian citizenship although I was a South African. So that's how I came to be in Australia. I had been to a political demo and been given a leaflet at the end of it at the Domain in Sydney, which told about a demo outside the British consulate at Circular Quay in Sydney, and I went to my first gay demo in April 1988. And then I discovered that there was a group there who had organised this demonstration, and they were called Gay Solidarity Group, and they invited me to come to a meeting, and that was the beginning of my gay activism. My partner and I, that's from Gay Solidarity and Lesbian Gay Solidarity, we got together in 1993, and that gave me an awful lot of confidence. It made me realise that I was a person in my own right, and made me feel much better as a human being.
So can you introduce your partner?
Oh, well, my partner is Ken Lovett, and he's 94 years old, and we've known each other since 1988, and we've been together since 1993. Ken's situation was better than mine.
How?
He was one of 4 children. He was the oldest, and he had a fairly satisfactory relation with his parents and his siblings. So his was a more normal existence always, and he didn't go through the convoluted process of having to get married and have a family.
How has Ken been an inspiration to you?
In every single way, with his activism, with his writing, with his affection for me, with everything, in every way you can think of. True, it's true.
Wow, what a fascinating interview that was, and how difficult it must have been growing up in the 40s and 50s with a real lack of information, a lack of knowledge of what was going on.
Absolutely. And of course, in contrast to that now, let's take a look at the Midsumma Carnival and just how different life is now. Wasn't it wonderful to see everyone out in the middle of the day dancing in those beautiful costumes?
It looked like a fantastic day. Really good. Really good. But now we're going to move on to an interview with Sharon and Hollis from the Uniting Church, who talks about the process they've gone through to move towards accepting same-sex marriage.
On the church's initiative to allow for same-sex marriages to take place where the parishes allow that to happen.
Thank you.
But you had a little bit of a snag, I understand.
We did. So
what happened?
Well, the Constitution of the Uniting Church allows, it's a sort of mathematical formula around state or regional bodies being allowed to challenge national decisions, and they've got 6 months to do that, and 7 what we call presbyteries, their regional councils, did that in 3 synods, and they needed a synod, a presbytery in South Australia, if it had agreed to challenge it as well, would have got it to that magic number where we would have had to reconvene the assembly and rediscuss it. But that presbytery came to the decision that they didn't want to challenge the decision, so it's continuing apace. So it's no change.
So that means that's it, it's locked in?
That's it, it's locked in. I mean, you know, people could always revisit it in 3 years, but I don't think there's any appetite for that. So we've already had a number of same-gender weddings, and they've been everything from very small and intimate to very large and amazing celebrations. But each one of them's been really joyous. There's been a sense of this has been long waited for, long hoped for, and so when the moment finally arrives, that, I mean, one way or another, we've been discussing the question of the inclusion of LGBTIQ people in the Uniting Church for 20 years, I guess, and in a way, the question about whether we would allow both congregations and ministers to marry gay and lesbian people was almost the last decision. So we, some years ago, made a decision that it was possible for LGBTI people to exercise ordained ministry. We've long said that LGBTIQ people are fully members of our church. They can participate in all everything that the church does. Our service agencies for a very long time have had inclusive employment practices and so on. So this, in a way, was the last thing. So I suspect that perhaps accounts for some of the energy around challenging it. That now that this has been allowed, in a way, around questions of at that kind of formal level, I think there's not really many more decisions. And I don't know, I think if you've ever studied change, processes of change, there's always resistance. And we have said in the Uniting Church that people that don't agree with this decision can continue to be members of the Uniting Church, and we seek to live in mutual trust, respect for each other, which, you know, in times like this gets very difficult when it gets very heated, but that's the position we're at.
So the interesting thing about the decision as it stands now is that it still does allow for some parishes, for some ministers to continue to discriminate. How does that sit with the overall philosophy of being an inclusive church?
For some people it's very hard. There were some people at Assembly, particularly from the LGBTIQ community, that would have preferred us not to have that. For myself, I think it's actually, I think it's honest. In some ways, I'd prefer us to have this position than to pretend we didn't have people that were opposed to LGBTIQ people and aren't willing to at least marry them, or will place caveats on their inclusion, because I think there'd be nothing worse than, you know, us proudly proclaiming we're a fully inclusive church and a gay or lesbian person or a transgendered person rocking up to their congregation only to discover the complete opposite is true. Right. If you're from the LGBTIQ community and you're interested in faith and you want to come to the Uniting Church, I think it says, do check us out. Make sure you kind of go to the right church, because I don't want you to be further damaged.
You know, let's say Collingwood is a parish. How does Collingwood decide yes, they will carry out these marriages, or no, they won't? How do they work that out?
Well, there's two different decisions. So the minister themselves can make a decision, makes a decision, and the congregation can't bind the minister. So it's up to the minister in conscience to decide what they'll do. And then the congregation, usually the church council, or sometimes the whole congregation will have a meeting and they'll put a proposal. And for many congregations, that's been a fairly simple decision. They've, in a way, as I say, because we've been discussing it for 20 years, they almost knew where they sat, even if they hadn't articulated it. For other congregations, it's been quite a struggle, and they've had quite a bit of education and learning and thinking through.
So Paul, what do you think? Can you see yourself getting married anytime soon?
It's good to understand for Uniting Church, at least there's another place that one could get married if you decided to.
If you wanted to.
Exactly. But finally now we're going to take a look at the activist Bill Hathaway and his really inspiring life about working with the direct action group ACT UP. So let's take a look at this.
Bill Hathaway was an American-born Australian resident activist who died in Melbourne in 1993, aged 27.
His was a life well lived, a life into which he packed a great deal of productive political work, especially his work in HIV/AIDS. Bill himself was HIV positive. He was employed with the Victorian AIDS Council as an HIV education officer. He developed a peer support campaign, recognising that HIV positive people had to lead the response to AIDS if it was going to be effective. He also recognised that the work had to be sex positive, that safe sex was good sex, and that message needed to be got out to people if they were to change their behaviour. Bill was very out about his HIV status, happy to do media and other public activities. At a time when shame around HIV status was still very widespread and discrimination was common. But he was happy to do forums, public meetings. He also participated in a radio program on 3CR. He was also an enthusiastic supporter of direct action, and it's no surprise that he was a founding member of ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, in Melbourne in 1990. This was an independent chapter of an international organisation founded in New York, which described itself as united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis. ACT UP was committed to confrontational actions, protests, demonstrations, zaps. They targeted politicians and the media, drug companies, the medical profession. In 1991, ACT UP launched a national campaign, the D-Day campaign, to demand faster, easier and more widespread access to drug treatments that were becoming available. The D in D-Day stood for drugs, deaths, delays, deadline. On D-Day itself, June the 6th, activists in Melbourne gathered. They spattered red paint on the Health Minister's office. At the Flinders Street intersection, they occupied and died in. And in their most famous action, they tore up Melbourne's iconic floral clock, seen here, and replaced the flowers with small white crosses, turning it into a miniature cemetery in memory of those who were dying as a result of the drug delays.
Such tough times in those days. How sad that, you know, such a beautiful young person had to go through that.
But what a great foundation for the modern drugs we have access to today.
Absolutely.
A great piece of work. But that's the end of our show today. What a great lineup we've had. We had Mannie to sax. We had Sharon Hollis from the Uniting Church. We had a great look at those costumes down at Midsumma. And finally, we heard from Bill Hathaway. But come back and join us next week. We'll have some more great stories for you on QTV.